I want to tell you about a patient of mine. His name is Robert. Robert is 74 years old, and he came to see me about 8 months ago. Not because he was sick, but because his wife made him come. She said, "Robert, you have not had a checkup in 3 years. You are going to that doctor." And he came, grumbling a little, the way men of his generation sometimes do, when they have been told to do something by the woman they love and respect and are slightly afraid of. He sat down in my office, and the first thing I noticed was how good he looked. Not good for 74, just good. Clear eyes, straight posture, alert, present, like a man who was genuinely well. And when we ran his blood work, the results confirmed what I could see. His fasting blood glucose was 94. His total cholesterol was 172. His LDL was 89. His blood pressure that morning was 121/74. His inflammatory marker, his CRP, his C-reactive protein, was 0.4, which is exceptionally low, indicating almost no chronic systemic inflammation in the man of 74. I looked at his chart, and then I looked at him, and I said, "Robert, what are you doing?" And he smiled, and he said, "Well, one thing I know for sure is what I am not doing. I am not eating leftovers the wrong way." And I leaned forward because in 20 years of practice, that is not an answer I have ever received. And he told me about something his mother had taught him when he was a boy, something she knew from decades of feeding a family, long before food science had a name for what she understood. She told him there are certain foods that you heat up once and eat, and there are certain foods that if you heat them up again, they are not the same food anymore. And she was right. And today I want to explain why she was right. I am Dr. Daniel Chen, and today I want to share with you 5 specific foods that when reheated after 60 create chemical changes that your body, and particularly your aging digestive system, your liver, and your cellular DNA handles significantly worse than it did 30 years ago. Robert knew about these foods not from a medical degree, but from his mother, and from paying attention to how his body responded over the course of a lifetime. And I believe that what he knows, every person over 60 deserves to know too. So let us start with the science, because what happens to food when it is reheated is not vague or theoretical. It is specific chemistry that has been studied and documented in food science research. When food is cooked, complex chemical reactions occur. Proteins denature, carbohydrates gelatinize, fats oxidize, and a range of new compounds form that were not present in the raw ingredients. Some of these new compounds are entirely harmless or even beneficial. But when certain foods are cooked, cooled, and then reheated, the chemistry goes further in directions that are not harmless. Proteins that have already been denatured rearrange their structure again in ways that can make them harder to digest. Fats that have already been oxidized once oxidize further into more harmful compounds. Bacteria that have grown during the cooling period, even in refrigerated food, are not all destroyed by reheating, particularly at uneven temperatures and in certain foods. Specifically, the 5 I am going to describe. These chemical changes are significant enough that the resulting food carries real risks that are meaningfully higher after 60, when the liver is less efficient at detoxifying harmful compounds, when the gut lining is more permeable and less resilient, when the immune system responds more vigorously to bacterial toxins, and when cellular DNA repair mechanisms are less robust than they were in younger years. Let us go through the 5 foods one by one. The first food is rice, specifically cooked rice that has been cooled and then reheated. Now, rice is one of the most commonly reheated foods in kitchens around the world. And most people, including many doctors, have never given it a second thought. But cooked rice is one of the most significant food safety risks in home cooking. And the risk is almost entirely in the reheating. Here's what happens. Raw rice grains often contain spores of a bacterium called Bacillus cereus. These spores are extraordinarily heat resistant. They survive the cooking process. When rice is cooked, the spores survive, and when the rice begins to cool, particularly if it is left at room temperature rather than refrigerated promptly, the spores germinate and the bacteria multiply rapidly, producing two types of toxins, one that causes vomiting and one that causes diarrhea. Now, here's the part that most people do not know. These toxins are heat stable. When you reheat the rice, you may kill the bacteria themselves. If the rice reaches a sufficiently high temperature, but the toxins they have already produced are not destroyed by reheating, they remain in the food. And when you eat that reheated rice, those toxins enter your digestive system. In a younger adult, the gastrointestinal symptoms are unpleasant but typically short-lived. But in an adult over 60, whose gut lining is more permeable, whose immune response is both slower and in some respects more exaggerated, and whose recovery from gastrointestinal illness takes longer, the consequences of Bacillus cereus toxin from reheated rice can be significantly more serious than a passing stomach upset. Robert told me his mother never reheated rice, ever. If there was rice left over, it was eaten cold in a salad or not eaten at all. And food science completely validates that instinct. The safest approach, if you cook more rice than you need, is to refrigerate it within 1 hour of cooking and eat it cold, in a rice salad or a cold grain bowl, without reheating, or to cook only the amount of rice you will eat at that sitting. The second food is chicken. Reheated chicken is something that millions of people do every single day. Leftover chicken in a sandwich, reheated chicken in a sauce, chicken that was roasted on Sunday and warmed up on Tuesday. And while a brief warming of refrigerated chicken at sufficiently high temperature is not always catastrophically dangerous, the risks of reheating chicken after 60 are real and specific and worth understanding. Chicken is a protein-rich food, and proteins, as I mentioned, rearrange their structure when heated. When chicken is cooked for the first time, its proteins denature, its structure changes, its moisture redistributes. When it is refrigerated, bacterial growth, even in a properly functioning refrigerator, can begin, particularly if the chicken was not cooled rapidly after initial cooking. When the chicken is reheated, two things can happen that create risk. First, if the chicken is not reheated to a sufficiently high internal temperature throughout its entire mass, not just on the surface, bacteria that have grown during refrigeration survive the reheating and are consumed. This is particularly relevant for thick pieces of chicken where the surface may feel hot while the center remains at a temperature that does not kill bacteria. Second, and this is the mechanism that most people have never heard of, the proteins in chicken, when broken down during the first cooking and then further altered during reheating, can form compounds called heterocyclic amines. If the reheating is done at high dry heat in a pan, in an oven, or in a microwave, that causes partial drying or browning. Heterocyclic amines are compounds that form when amino acids, the building blocks of protein, react with creatine, a compound found in muscle tissue, under high heat conditions. And heterocyclic amines are classified by the International Agency for Research on Cancer as possible to probable human carcinogens. After 60, when cellular DNA repair mechanisms are less efficient. The exposure to carcinogenic compounds in the diet carries greater cumulative risk than at younger ages. Robert told me he never reheats chicken. He eats it cold, or he slices it fresh from a just cooked breast over a salad. Or he makes a cold chicken dish that requires no reheating, and the food science supports his approach. The safest way to handle leftover chicken is to eat it cold within 24 hours of initial cooking, rather than reheating it. The third food is eggs, specifically reheated cooked eggs, scrambled eggs, boiled eggs, omelets that were cooked, refrigerated, and then reheated. Eggs are one of the most nutritionally rich foods available, and when freshly cooked, they are excellent, particularly for older adults who need high-quality protein and fat-soluble vitamins. But when eggs are reheated, several things happen that change their safety profile significantly. The first is oxidation of the cholesterol within the egg. Eggs are naturally high in cholesterol, primarily in the yolk. When egg cholesterol is heated, oxysterols form, oxidized forms of cholesterol that are significantly more harmful to the cardiovascular system than unoxidized cholesterol, because oxysterols are more readily incorporated into arterial plaques, more inflammatory to the arterial wall, and more damaging to endothelial cells than regular dietary cholesterol. The initial cooking of an egg already begins this oxidation process. Reheating the egg takes it significantly further, producing higher concentrations of oxysterols in the same portion than were present after initial cooking alone, after 60, when the arterial environment is already more vulnerable, and when oxidative stress is already higher. Increasing dietary oxysterol exposure from reheated eggs adds to a cardiovascular burden that is already elevated. The second change that occurs when eggs are reheated is the further denaturation of egg proteins in ways that make them harder to digest and more likely to cause digestive discomfort in older adults, whose digestive enzyme production is already somewhat reduced. As I discussed in my video on afternoon bloating, Robert eats eggs every morning, but always freshly cooked. He has never reheated eggs in his life. He said his mother called it making dead food, which is not scientific terminology, but captures something real about what repeated heating does to these proteins. The fourth food is spinach and other nitrate-rich leafy greens, including beet greens, Swiss chard, rocket, and celery. This one surprises almost everyone because spinach is widely considered one of the healthiest foods available. And it is when freshly cooked. But reheated spinach is a different matter, particularly after 60. Here's what happens. Spinach is exceptionally rich in naturally occurring nitrates, which, as I've discussed, are beneficial compounds that the body converts to nitric oxide, supporting blood pressure regulation and endothelial health. But spinach also contains natural bacteria on its surface and bacteria in the gut that contain nitrate-reducing enzymes. When spinach is cooked, some of these bacteria are killed, but not all. And when the cooked spinach is cooled and left to sit, either at room temperature or even in a refrigerator, the surviving bacteria and the bacterial enzymes that remain active even at refrigerator temperatures begin converting the nitrates in the spinach into nitrites. And when the nitrite-containing spinach is reheated, the nitrites, under the conditions of heat and in the presence of amino acids from the spinach proteins, can form compounds called nitrosamines. And nitrosamines are among the most well-established dietary carcinogens known to food science, classified as probable human carcinogens by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. The same spinach that is genuinely healthy when freshly cooked and eaten immediately becomes a source of nitrosamines. When cooled, left to sit, and reheated, particularly when reheated multiple times. This transformation is a well-recognized issue in food science literature and is particularly relevant for older adults because the daily consumption of reheated spinach or other nitrate-rich vegetables over months and years represents a cumulative nitrosamine exposure that after 60, when cellular DNA repair is less efficient, carries real long-term risk. Robert told me his mother always said, "Cook your spinach fresh, never from yesterday." And once again, she was right. The safest approach is to cook leafy greens fresh in the amount you will eat immediately rather than cooking large batches to be reheated throughout the week. The fifth food is mushrooms. Mushrooms are nutritionally exceptional. They are one of the few non-animal food sources of vitamin D. They contain beta-glucan, the same soluble fiber I discussed in the oats video, with immune modulating properties. And they are rich in a range of bioactive compounds that have genuine health benefits. But mushrooms after 60 should be eaten freshly cooked and not reheated. Here's why. Mushrooms contain a complex mixture of proteins, polysaccharides, and other nitrogen-containing compounds that begin to break down rapidly after cooking during the cooling period. Even in the refrigerator, mushroom proteins decompose at a rate that is significantly faster than most other vegetables. And this decomposition produces compounds that, when the mushrooms are reheated and consumed, can cause digestive disturbance in sensitive individuals, particularly those with the reduced digestive enzyme production that is common after 60. But more specifically, mushrooms, like spinach, are subject to bacterial nitrate reduction during the cooling period because they too contain naturally occurring nitrates. And the same nitrosamine formation pathway that I described for spinach applies to mushrooms that are cooked, cooled, and reheated. There is also a specific concern with mushrooms that is worth knowing. Mushrooms contain compounds called purines that, when mushrooms are reheated, are released in higher concentrations than after initial cooking. And elevated purine intake increases uric acid levels in the blood, which, as I discussed in my video on gout, is a specific concern for older adults in whom gout and elevated uric acid are already more common. Robert told me he loves mushrooms. He eats them regularly, but always freshly cooked, always added to a dish just before eating, never the day-old mushrooms reheated in the microwave from last night's dinner. Now, let me also give you Robert's practical approach to handling leftovers, because this is something he thought through carefully over the years. And that makes complete sense, given what food science shows. Robert does not reheat these 5 foods, but he does not waste them either. Rice left over from a meal goes into a cold rice salad with lemon juice, olive oil, cucumber, and herbs, eaten the next day without reheating. Chicken left over from a roast is sliced cold and eaten over salad or in a cold wrap, or a cold chicken and avocado bowl, again without reheating. Eggs he never makes, in quantities that require refrigeration. He cooks what he will eat at that meal and that meal only. Spinach and leafy greens, he cooks in small amounts, only what he will eat immediately. If he wants spinach the next day, he cooks fresh spinach. It takes 3 minutes. He says it is worth the 3 minutes. And mushrooms, he adds to dishes, only at the last moment, never from a batch that was cooked the day before. He said his mother had a phrase for all of this. She called it honest food. Food that is what it is, cooked when you need it, eaten when it is ready, and let go when its time is past. And there is wisdom in that goes beyond sentimentality. Now, let me also say something that I think is important to say directly. I am not telling you that reheating these foods once on one occasion will cause serious harm. The risks I have described are cumulative. They are about regular, repeated, daily habits over months and years. A person who occasionally reheats last night's rice on a Friday evening when they are tired is not in serious danger. A person who eats reheated rice, reheated eggs, reheated spinach, and reheated chicken multiple times per week, every week, year after year, after 60, when the body handles these compounds less efficiently, is accumulating a burden that is worth reducing if it can be reduced easily. And with Robert, and with patients like him, the adjustment was easy because he understood why. And when you understand why, something stops feeling like a restriction and starts feeling like a gift you are giving yourself. Let me bring everything together now. 5 foods that change their chemistry when reheated in ways that matter more after 60. Rice, which can harbor Bacillus cereus toxins that survive reheating and cause gastrointestinal harm. Chicken, which can develop bacteria during refrigeration and form heterocyclic amines under high heat reheating. Eggs, which oxidize their cholesterol into oxysterols that are more harmful to the cardiovascular system with each successive heating. Spinach and nitrate-rich leafy greens, which form nitrosamines through bacterial nitrate reduction during cooling and conversion during reheating. And mushrooms, which decompose rapidly, release purines in higher concentrations, and are subject to the same nitrosamine pathway as leafy greens. The safest approach is to eat these foods freshly cooked in the amount you need at that meal, and to find cold alternatives for any that are left over, rather than reheating them. Robert's mother, who never had a medical degree, understood this intuitively. And Robert, who followed her guidance, walked into my office at 74 with the blood work of a man who was doing everything right. I am Dr. Daniel Chen. If this video gave you something that changes how you think about the food on your plate after 60, please share it with someone you care about who is also over 60 and who deserves to know what their mother may have known and what food science has now confirmed. Subscribe to this channel for weekly videos made with genuine care for older adults who deserve real information about their own health. And leave me a comment below. Tell me which of these 5 foods you have been reheating regularly and which one surprises you most. I read every single comment and I genuinely look forward to hearing from you. Take care of yourself and take care about what you heat up for dinner tonight.